And welcome everyone around the world across our time zones. I know the last time you met together, you listened to Meg Wheatley. And these days we say that we stand on the shoulders of many. I think I would rather use the expression I'm embraced by the arms of many these days, as living in Findhorn and still under mostly lockdown, hugs are at a great premium. So I like to think being embraced by the people who have influenced me. I probably studied with Meg, maybe 25 years. And she has deeply influenced me to think about living systems at multiple scales. When I first started to work with her, I was looking at the scale of leaders and teams and organizations. And then I went on to work with communities, which of course, if you read Meg's tagline for many years, it said, if there's a problem, community is the answer. And I went on to move from communities to look at cities. I was delighted when I saw people coming on the call today to see Edward Muller, and I have spent a lot of the last week with him on the Humanity Rising Summit, and really so much admire his work in economics with living systems. For that conversation, I brought in my work in relation to biomimicry, because I think about cities as human hives. But today I was asked to look at what are the capacities that we need to weave living systems today. And maybe has there been a shift in the work as I've been noticing it in the last while. I'm going to share my screen and we'll have a chance for a little conversation as well as moving into breakouts at the end. Here we go. There we go. Can you see that okay, Valentina? So, in thinking about how are we entering a new stage of waking up the human hive, as Valentina said, I've given a bunch of links to you, including the link to the free book that I'm going to share with you, looking at how we accelerate city change in a VUCA world. If you want to learn more about my work, I've written 3 books. So as I'm noticing how things are changing in this world that I first started to think about the intelligences of human systems at the city scale. And then I looked at action research, inquiry and action, and how to design impact for the human hive. And my 3rd book was reframing complex challenges for Gaia's human hives. I did actually look at biosecurity in one of those chapters because I have lived in Abbotsford, Canada, in British Columbia for a number of years, and I had to live through a couple of different pandemics, both SARS and avian flu. So when COVID has come along, it really felt like territory I had been through before. But as Edward has said more than once over the last week, we've never experienced such a global way of having to respond to, in this case, a bio challenge, and actually try to figure out how to do this together all around the world, no matter what culture we're in. And I keep thinking about what is impacting our cities as I go from day to day. When I was starting on this call, we were just talking about schools starting their opening in the United States. I live in Findhorn, Scotland now, and even today, just before this meeting, I was with our coronavirus action group, and we're looking at the challenges that we face around people who don't want to wear masks. Well, here it is actually the law. So there's all kinds of challenges we face as a small eco-village, just trying to hold the values that are important for us as a community. Today, when we're looking at capacities, I could take you through all of the 12 intelligences I wrote about in the first book, and now are actually part of what I call the Integral City GPS. But I thought that really, in order for us to manage our time for the greatest impact today, I would like to talk a little bit about the mesh-working intelligence, because I think it's very related to weaving, and also the code of the master care, which is very much related to that evolutionary intelligence which drives all the others. What is the master code of care? Well, in the very last chapter of my first book, I discovered that there was something that a high school principal had decided was part of the way that they were going to run the school. I think it was supposed to have been in New Zealand. And this was while I was working with Margaret Wheatley's Burkina Community of Conversations, which became actually the case study for my dissertation. And there in New Zealand, the principal said, I have an announcement I'd like to make on this day one of school. Here's the 3 rules we're going to use around here. First of all, everyone agrees to look after themselves. Then we agree to care for each other, and together we're going to care for this place. And when I was thinking about how all the intelligences I had written about in the 11 previous chapters, I thought, this is a universal principle, and it can actually be elevated to a planetary scale. So it has become what I call the master code of care, that in order for us to care for the planet, we must first care for ourselves so that we can care for others, so that we can care for our places, and altogether we care for the planet. So in this book that Valentina was referring to and that you'll get a link to has been curated actually through those 4 dimensions of the Master Code of Care. And every part of the book contributed to ways that people are contributing their practices in service to a city. I imagined, since these are all integrally informed practices, but they're distributed around the world, I had a fantasy for many years. What would happen if we pulled all those practices together into one city? Could we make a change? Could we accelerate how transformation happens in this city? And so once I had curated the book, I realized that what had happened was we had what I would call a sacred meshwork. So I want to just share with you this sacred meshwork, but before I do, I would like to just ask you a question and just to get some of your own responses. How do you, or together with others, practice care for yourself? Caring for others, caring for place, caring for planet. Can any of you give examples of how you might do that from any one of those dimensions? Think about yourself as you got up this morning. How did you take care of yourself or others? Anybody?
In the chat or live?
Live. Let's hear live.
I would say gratitude for myself also, to practice like on a daily basis, to thanking myself and thanking others, and definitely gratitude to what life has to offer is one.
Thank you. Yeah, very, very powerful practice, gratitude. Who else has a practice?
I can add to that, Marilyn. My practice is to cultivate mindfulness on a regular basis, not necessarily, throughout the day, wherever I am. And then I try to expand that to people that are close to me, to people that I'm working with, and I try to bring that with my presence to places where I am.
Beautiful. So your mindfulness is going actually through scales of self, others, and places. Beautiful. Yeah. Anybody else have a practice? Is anyone caring for the planet? I'd have to poke at Edward, since I've listened to him for a week, and say, you have to really step out, Edward, and say, I think you are caring for the planet, but how do you think you're doing that?
It's a big journey, and trying to scale it up. So by leading a nationwide regenerative initiative to convert Costa Rica into the first actively regenerative country, to be able to influence with that road mapping process other countries, and bringing all the complexity of this huge mess of issues that have been accumulating over the last decades or centuries in our culture, in our economic system, unlearning. It is complex, and it's a beautiful challenge, and it's the only one we have. The only road we have actually ahead of us is that regeneration process at the global level.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Edward. So I'm sure that each one of you can think there are ways that you care for yourself, others, and together your places. And really that adds up to, when we put it all together, caring for the planet. So I actually ask you to hold this because I want to show you how the book also emerged, the ways that we can put this together as a meshwork. So,
sorry to interrupt. I think your screen is pixelated. I got a few things in the chat that it's hard to read. Do you mind if I try sharing my screen for you?
sure. Yes, you can try that. See if that helps.
Is this better?
That's the slide, yes. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot better? Okay, great. Thank you for interrupting.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So as I said, this book, where I invited all the integrally informed practitioners to contribute to ways that their work could serve a city, when we pulled it all together, I saw that we had what I would call a sacred meshwork. So there is, when I do the practice and capacity development of meshworking, a design equation. And the equation is there on the screen. How do we work together in service to the well-being of Gaia, and what groups of people for what purpose where? So the example that Edward gave is a really good response to that. But if you just keep going to the next screen, thank you, Valentina. Here, I just want to show you how we unpack that design equation. So these are all drawing from examples in the book. And I'm going to lead you into your breakout group to be thinking about your own city or a city of interest, and maybe a challenge that you face, and how you might bring your practices together, and how you might think about some of these aspects of the question. So first of all, we looked at who are we as a team of practitioners or catalysts or meshworkers. And we can see that the capacity development that I wrote about in my third book of caring and contexting and capacity building all work together to frame those capacities. We can see that the Integral Without Borders brought together how do they meet people where they're at. So no matter what level of capacity we're thinking at, how do we meet people where they are at? And then the last example here is looking at how we look at all of the different elements in the city at different scales, the individuals, the leaders, the organizations, the communities, and how do we bring them into thinking of them as part of the team. And the next slide. So if we look at our team, then one of the ways that I think about the city is I use the 4 voices of the city. And the 4 voices you can see in the upper left slide, which is an example that's drawn from integral coaching. And here we look at the citizens, the civic managers, business innovators, and civil society. So how do we coach them? And in the upper right hand, we see that there is a way to constellate them and bring them together, even in ways that they hadn't seen from an invisible perspective. And then the other slide here is coming from the third sector, where they've brought the 4 voices together and they're working together. And this is actually from the third sector in Moray, which is in Scotland, is actually using this model. So from voices, let's go to the next slide. And we see that we have to actually understand what's our project. As Edward pointed to, he has a very complex project. But there is something that I would say they've got as a superordinate goal. They're trying to pull together something that is serving a goal that brings together all the organizations. And there's also in these slides people who have been working at this for 20 years or more. There's a man from Nelson, BC, who's been working with their community forest project. And he, in the book, outlines 20 years of learning of how to bring together their work. One of the challenges that he gives is not only putting the superordinate goal out, but how do we work together and cohere our energy fields. And as Daniel Christian Wall talks about, how does our project evolve over time? So from our project, we go next to the next slide. And here we can see, as we bring together different organizations, we've got the dynamics and the collaborative influence. Even these days with our best intentions, sometimes it's really hard to let go of the competitiveness that we've been brought up with, to think that our organizations actually can rise above the competitive ways of interacting and come from the cooperative and more collaborative ways, and have an awareness, as the slide that looks at how we actually design. So there's an integral designer, Mark Decay, who actually is looking at the climate, the region, and the built form within the complexity. So moving from organizations to the next slide, we can also consider, just like many of us did since you're still in the early part of your day, you connected with your families. And we cannot accelerate city change without being able to understand how we hold our children and how to integrate our ecological, social, cultural, and economic dimensions, as the Global Eco-Village Network shows. I did see a question that said, what does VUCA mean? So I'm sorry that I used this piece of jargon, which is often used in the world of complexity these days. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it's a term that the military coined some years ago to say this is the world that we have to work in now. And so this is why things are so difficult to be able to emerge something that makes sense. And the next slide. So if we have the considerations of organizations and our families, then there needs to be some ways to map our meshwork and ask, well, what are our intentions? How do we interact with what Karen O'Brien points to as the 3 spheres? Some of you might have worked with some of the United Nations and Monica Sharma's work, which identifies these 3 spheres of being: the practical, so this is where all the technology happens; the political, this is where policy is made; but this huge sphere of the personal interaction. How can we work with those 3 spheres and not only bring together a strategy of meshwork across time that can unfold across convening, clarifying, co-creating, and celebrating, but maybe we even need to invite people to gamify the system so that we can engage with it in different ways. And the next one, Valentina. So now, one of the most powerful things that we need to recognize when we're trying to measure and evaluate projects and even create some of these strategies in complex systems is that actually telling our stories is really, really powerful and important. We need to be able to share with each other how our values align, how our intelligences are alive within us, and how we're capturing visions. So Jude Currivan, the cosmologist, she talks about not just the old saw of thinking locally, but she says we must think cosmically, feel globally, and act locally. And once we open up this large a set of dimensions, we go beyond even the planetary scale and realize that we can restory ourselves in order to restore. And the next slide, Valentina. So the last thing I want to share with you before we go to the breakout is, all this sounds great, but how would a real city use this? So this was the second part of my fantasy. I did want to see, could I bring together a way of all these different practitioners imagining they were in one city. I shared this when I'm working with Urban Arena Europe, and the group out of Lisbon said, well, let us try it. We've got a project. And they have a project called Marvila. I don't know any of you know Lisbon, but Marvila is an older part of the city and in many respects has many brown fields in it. And they looked at how this little book on the ways of accelerating city change could be applied to their challenge. So rather than reading these very small print, let's go to the several slides that showed how they went through the book, and I helped them to cherry pick. Let's see what the next slide is, Valentina. And they said, okay, we have a team, we're going to work with Marvila, and you know, one of the most important things that we have to do is to understand the team worldviews and meet people where they're at. We have to be able to listen to their stories, but we have to be able to know how to do that as a team. So the next thing they went to, beyond looking at their team, was they recognized the importance of the 4 voices and how the project might evolve. So they realized that they would meet people not just in general where they're at, but who are the citizens? Who are the civic managers? Who are the business innovators? And where does the third sector fit into all of this? They looked at the lessons that had been learned in British Columbia for 20 years and thought, we can remember how that evolves and how we will pull together our project so that there will be some natural stages to it. And the next slide, Valentina. So they finally, I was surprised that they chose this way of thinking about how to tell better stories, because they chose actually an economic system to tell better stories about Marvila. And this was the way that Meta Impact has taken the different perspectives from the I, we, it, and its perspectives of an integral perspective to tell the stories. Because they noticed the headline on this particular part of the book said, civic institutions, business, and third sector want more of the right kinds of impact, and citizens want to be able to share their stories. So if we give us, I think it's pretty close to the last slide here. Yes, they landed in this last slide from my colleague Ian White, another good Scotsman in Edinburgh right now, who wrote a whole section called Making a Place We Can Call Home. So this was what the project set out to do, is this is probably close to their superordinate goal. How can we help make the change in Marvila so that we can make sure everyone can call home? So now we come to your breakout. And this is the question that I would give you. Valentina is going to put you into, how many people will be in the breakouts, do you think, Valentina? Had you organized that? You're on mute. I can't hear you.
About 4 people.
Okay, 4 people is great. So when you get into your group of 4, what I'd like to suggest that you do is choose one of the cities that you live in, or one of the cities that you're most interested in, especially if you know that they're facing a challenge. And if you don't know of something specific, I think you can probably dream up something out of our coronavirus challenged world. I don't know of any city that's not facing challenges these days. And then look at who is there. You are the team. In your breakout group, you're the team, and you're going to bring together your capacities to try and align your services in a sacred meshwork to address that challenge. So as you talk about that, you might notice, you know, there's other capacities we need in order to address this. So who else would you invite to work with you in that city challenge? And that is a very Meg Wheatley question I learned a long time ago from her. Follow the energy. That's what you're bringing, is your energy. And always ask, who else should be here?